This one's for everyone who loves lighthouses, the calm of them, the impossible height of them, and the terrifying, towering waves that occasionally try to swallow them whole. Tonight, you get all three. You're the keeper of a lighthouse, standing on a narrow spit of rock, far enough from the mainland that on clear days it's barely a smudge on the horizon. Tonight isn't a clear day. The wind arrived first, sometime around dusk, and it's been building steadily ever since, until now, well past midnight. It's screaming past your tower at a pitch that makes conversation with yourself feel pointless. The waves started as ordinary waves, the kind this rock has weathered for over a century without complaint. They aren't ordinary anymore. Somewhere in the last 2 hours, they started reaching high enough to strike your lamp room's windows directly, 70 feet above the water. An impossible height that suddenly doesn't feel quite so impossible when solid seawater is hitting the glass hard enough to make the entire tower shudder beneath your feet. And somewhere out in that chaos, invisible beyond your own light's reach, a ship is in genuine trouble. You saw its signal flare 20 minutes ago, a brief, desperate streak of red light before the storm swallowed it back into darkness. You've heard, faintly, what might have been a ship's distress horn, though the wind makes it impossible to be entirely certain. Your job right now isn't complicated, even if it's suddenly become more urgent. Keep the light burning. Keep it burning through wind that's trying to tear the lamp room apart, through waves reaching height you didn't think this tower's design ever anticipated, because somewhere out there, a crew who may already be fighting for their lives is depending entirely on your light. You don't know yet whether that ship makes it through tonight. You don't know yet whether your own tower holds against a storm, building strength faster than any storm you've personally witnessed here before. Tonight, you're going to find out both answers, one increasingly nerve-wracking hour at a time, standing watch in the single, loneliest, most essential job ever invented, in the middle of the worst storm this stretch of coastline has seen in years. You climb the tower's internal spiral staircase quickly, each iron step ringing faintly beneath your boots despite the wind's roar outside. Muscle memory guiding your ascent through darkness, broken only by the small lamp you carry, a route you've climbed so many hundreds of times before that your feet find each step almost without conscious thought. The staircase itself, tightly wound around the tower's central shaft, seems to amplify the storm's sound as you climb higher. Wind that felt merely loud at ground level, growing steadily more ferocious with each additional story, until by the time you reach the lamp room itself, near the tower's very top, the noise has become something closer to a physical presence pressing against your eardrums. You emerge into the lamp room, the tower's crowning chamber, glass panels surrounding you on every side offering, on ordinary nights, a spectacular view across open water. Tonight, those same glass panels show you nothing beyond swirling darkness, and every few seconds, the sudden white shock of spray striking directly against the glass. The great lens itself sits at the room's center, patient and enormous, its intricate glass prisms catching and focusing your lamp's flame into the powerful, sweeping beam that's meant to be visible for miles across open water on an ordinary night. Tonight, you wonder how far that beam is managing to penetrate through this thickening wall of storm and spray. You check the mechanism carefully. The clockwork motor that rotates the lens at its steady, reliable pace listening for anything in its rhythm that might suggest strain or malfunction beyond the storm's obvious physical assault against the tower's exterior structure. Everything, for now, still functions. The light still turns. The flame still burns steady within the lens's careful focus. You allow yourself one brief, steadying breath before turning your attention outward toward the dark, churning water where you glimpsed that signal flare only minutes before climbing up here. Before tonight's storm demands your full attention, it's worth understanding exactly what your ordinary daily and nightly duties as lighthouse keeper involve, because tonight's dramatic crisis represents the genuine exception rather than this job's actual daily reality. Most nights pass in methodical routine rather than anything resembling tonight's mounting drama. You light the lamp precisely at dusk, following procedures refined across generations of lighthouse keeping, trimming wicks, checking oil reserves, ensuring the lens mechanism turns smoothly and reliably through the entire coming night's duration. Throughout each night, you maintain a careful watch schedule, checking the light periodically, logging weather conditions, watching for any ships that might need warning about dangerous conditions near your specific stretch of coastline. This routine continues regardless of season, regardless of weather, regardless of how you personally happen to feel on any particular night. Daytime hours bring their own considerable responsibilities. Cleaning the lens's numerous glass prisms, meticulous work requiring genuine care, given how significantly even minor smudging might reduce the light's crucial nighttime visibility. Maintaining the mechanical systems, keeping everything functioning. This job demands a kind of person. Someone comfortable with extended solitude, methodical and reliable regardless of external validation, knowing that a lighthouse keeper's success is measured primarily by the absence of disaster, rather than any more directly visible, immediately celebrated achievement. You've held this post for several years now, long enough that its rhythms feel less like imposed duty and more like simply the natural shape your own daily life has settled into, solitary but purposeful, quiet but essential to ships and sailors who likely never know your name. You think back, occasionally, to how you came to hold this unusual profession, a path that felt, at the time, less like careful, deliberate career planning and more like a series of circumstances gradually leading you toward work that eventually proved well-suited to your own particular temperament. You'd served previously in merchant shipping, several years experiencing firsthand exactly the kind of maritime dangers lighthouses specifically exist to help prevent. Genuine practical experience that proved valuable once you eventually transitioned toward lighthouse keeping rather than continuing your own seafaring career. An injury, relatively minor but sufficient to end your active sailing career, prompted this transition. Maritime authorities, recognizing your practical seafaring experience as valuable qualification for lighthouse work, understanding intuitively exactly what conditions and dangers ships faced from a sailor's direct perspective rather than simply theoretical, second-hand understanding. Training for this specific profession involved considerable technical education regarding lens maintenance, mechanical systems, and proper procedure, combined with practical assessment regarding your genuine psychological suitability for this profession's particular demands. Extended isolation, representing a genuine qualifying concern, maritime authorities took seriously when selecting candidates for this demanding work. You'd approached this career transition with some uncertainty initially, wondering whether you'd find this more solitary, less physically active profession personally satisfying compared to your previous, more socially engaged seafaring career. Though these initial uncertainties gradually resolved as you discovered satisfaction in this profession's particular combination of technical skill, essential purpose, and solitary self-reliance. You consider, now, years into this career, how fortunate you feel having found work that suits your particular temperament and previous experience. This profession's demands feeling, most days, like natural extension of your own personal capabilities, rather than externally imposed obligation you merely tolerate for practical necessity. The great lens dominating your lamp room represents, in its own quiet way, one of the more remarkable pieces of practical engineering you interact with regularly. A Fresnel lens, named after the French physicist who developed this ingenious design specifically to solve lighthouse illumination's genuine practical challenges. Before this lens design, lighthouses struggled to produce light powerful and far-reaching enough to warn ships at meaningful distance. Traditional lens designs requiring impractically large, heavy glass structures to achieve adequate light concentration and projection. Fresnel's design solved this challenge through a series of precisely cut, concentric glass rings and prisms. Lighter and more practical than traditional solid lens designs, while improving light concentration and projection distance beyond what earlier lighthouse technology had ever achieved. You've come to appreciate this lens's careful engineering during your years maintaining it, understanding intellectually and practically exactly how each individual prism contributes to capturing and redirecting your lamp's flame into the powerful, focused beam capable of warning ships many miles distant on ordinary clear nights. Tonight, watching this same lens continue its patient, steady rotation despite the storm's mounting fury outside, you feel particular gratitude for this careful engineering, trusting that whatever additional distance and power this lens design provides might prove crucial for whatever ship remains struggling somewhere out into night's dangerous, storm-tossed darkness. The lens turns steadily, indifferent to the storm's noise and fury, focused entirely on its singular essential purpose, taking your lamp's modest flame and transforming it into something powerful enough to potentially mean the difference between safe passage and genuine disaster for whoever happens to be watching for it from out there in tonight's dangerous dark. Your lamp's actual flame, however sophisticated the surrounding lens technology, still requires the same fundamental, careful maintenance any open flame demands. Attention that becomes more urgent given tonight's fierce wind, occasionally finding ways to test even your lamp room's careful sealing and construction. You check the wick's condition carefully, trimming where necessary to maintain clean, steady combustion rather than the smoky, less effective burning an improperly maintained wick would otherwise produce. Oil reserves, checked and topped as needed, must last through tonight's entire duration, regardless of how long this storm ultimately persists. The lamp itself sits within a carefully designed housing, protected from direct wind while still allowing the specific airflow proper combustion requires. A balance refined across generations of lighthouse keeping experience into reliable, well-understood procedure you follow now, almost automatically, despite tonight's mounting external chaos. You remain alert tonight to any sign the storm's fury might somehow compromise this careful flame maintenance. Wind finding some unexpected gap, or the towers shaking somehow, disrupting the lamp's steady function in ways your ordinary experience hasn't previously required you to address. This flame, modest as it appears up close, represents tonight's single most crucial element, the actual source powering everything else your lighthouse accomplishes. The lens's careful engineering meaningless without this steady, reliable flame for it to capture and project outward into the storm-tossed darkness. You tend this flame now with particular, focused attention, aware that tonight, more than perhaps any other night in recent memory, its steady flame might matter more than usual, given whatever desperate situation that ship you glimpsed earlier is currently facing somewhere out in this fierce, dangerous storm. You think back now, working steadily at the lamp's maintenance, to that first flare you spotted perhaps 30 minutes ago now, a brief, unmistakable streak of red light rising briefly above the horizon before the storm's darkness swallowed it back into obscurity. Signal flares carry unmistakable meaning among sailors and lighthouse keepers alike, a clear, deliberate signal of genuine distress rather than any kind of routine communication. Ships don't waste flares carelessly, not during a storm this severe, when every available resource might prove crucial for the crew's continued survival. You'd immediately begun watching more intently after spotting this signal, straining your eyes against the storm's chaos for any additional sign of this ship's location or condition. Though the combination of darkness, distance, and increasingly severe weather made any clear, reliable observation difficult to achieve. You considered, briefly, whether any response signal from your own lighthouse might prove useful, though standard procedure in situations like this generally emphasizes maintaining your primary light's steady function, rather than risking any additional complexity that might compromise your lighthouse's essential, ongoing navigational purpose. The absence of any subsequent flare troubles you somewhat, uncertain whether this simply reflects the ship conserving remaining flares for greater emergency, or whether it suggests something has changed about their situation that you have no direct way of understanding. You return your attention periodically to the dark water beyond your lamp room's windows, watching for any further sign of this struggling vessel, aware that your own careful watchfulness represents at least some form of attention and concern extended toward whoever's currently fighting for survival somewhere out in tonight's dangerous, storm-tossed darkness. Amid your intense focus on the struggling vessel's distress signals, you remain aware that other ships likely continue passing this stretch of coastline tonight as well. Vessels whose captains and crews are managing tonight's severe storm through their own skilled navigation without requiring the kind of emergency signal you've been anxiously watching for. From that one particular struggling ship, you catch, occasionally, brief glimpses of other running lights moving carefully through the darkness and storm. Ships maintaining safe distance from your rocky shoals, their crews clearly experienced enough to handle tonight's severe conditions without needing to signal genuine distress, despite the obviously challenging circumstances. These other, apparently safely passing vessels provide a kind of quiet reassurance amid tonight's tension, confirmation that your light continues serving its essential function for multiple ships simultaneously, not merely the one struggling vessel that's captured your primary anxious attention throughout tonight's extended crisis. You think about these other unknown crews, sailors navigating tonight's danger through their own skill and experience. Your lighthouse's steady presence, providing exactly the same essential reference point for their safe passage as it's hopefully providing for that other, more visibly struggling vessel. This awareness helps you maintain perspective during tonight's intense focus on one particular emergency, knowing that your essential function extends beyond just this one dramatic situation. Your continued reliable service, protecting an unknown number of ships and crews, making their own careful way through tonight's severe, dangerous storm. You return your attention to watching for further signs from your primary concern, that struggling vessel whose crew's safety remains your most immediate worry, while maintaining background awareness that tonight's storm affects more vessels than just the one whose distress you happen to directly witness and respond to. Understanding exactly what a ship's distress signal represents requires appreciating the genuine desperation typically underlying any sailor's decision to deploy one during a storm as severe as tonight's has clearly become. Ships facing ordinary, difficult weather generally simply continue working through it. Experienced crews trained specifically to handle rough seas and strong winds, without necessarily requiring outside assistance or signaling emergency to nearby observers like yourself. A flare specifically indicates circumstances beyond ordinary difficult weather. Genuine structural damage, dangerous flooding, navigation failure, or some other serious complication that's convinced the ship's captain that outside awareness has become necessary for the crew's continued safety. Watching for further signs from this struggling vessel, you know that whatever specific crisis prompted that earlier flare likely remains ongoing. Storms, this severe, rarely resolving quickly enough to fully address whatever serious complication, initially prompted a desperate crew to signal for help. Your own lighthouse, while unable to directly rescue anyone from a ship in genuine distress, still serves a crucial function even during exactly this kind of emergency, providing a reliable navigational reference point that might help a struggling crew maintain their orientation and avoid additional, potentially fatal, navigational error. You think about the crew currently facing whatever crisis prompted their signal, hoping that your light's continued steady presence through tonight's storm provides whatever small additional margin of safety and orientation their difficult situation might currently benefit from. Beyond your primary light itself, your lighthouse station includes additional warning systems specifically designed for exactly this kind of severe weather condition, when visibility becomes so poor that light alone might prove insufficient for reliably warning nearby ships. Your fog bell, mounted lower in the tower and connected to mechanical striking apparatus, provides audible warning capable of reaching ships even when visual light signals become unreliable. Given tonight's combination of darkness, distance, and severe storm conditions, you've already activated this bell tonight. Its steady, mechanical striking, adding audible warning alongside your visual light, hoping this additional sensory signal might help any nearby vessels maintain better awareness of your position and the genuine hazard your rocky outcrop represents during this severe storm. The bell's mechanism requires periodic checking, ensuring its striking mechanism continues functioning despite tonight's severe wind and wave action, potentially affecting its delicate mechanical components. You listen carefully between the wind's gusts, trying to judge whether your bell's sound is carrying effectively out toward wherever that struggling ship currently finds itself. Though the storm's overwhelming general noise makes any confident assessment difficult, this combination of visual and audible warning represents your lighthouse's full capability during conditions this severe. Every available tool deployed simultaneously in hopes that some combination of light, sound, and simple, steady presence might provide whatever crucial additional margin of safety struggling vessels nearby might currently need. This stretch of coastline, you understand well from your own research and from stories passed down through generations of previous keepers, carries a difficult history that explains exactly why a lighthouse was eventually built on this specific, isolated rock formation. Before this lighthouse existed, this stretch of water claimed numerous ships across many years. Treacherous, underwater rock formations, combined with frequently poor visibility conditions, creating exactly the kind of persistent, serious navigational hazard that eventually convinced maritime authorities this specific danger warranted the considerable expense of constructing a proper lighthouse. Historical records document numerous specific wrecks at this exact location before the lighthouse's construction. Ships lost with considerable loss of life, tragedies that accumulated across enough years to finally generate sufficient political and public pressure toward addressing this persistent, well-documented maritime hazard. Construction itself, when finally undertaken, represented genuine engineering achievement given this location's isolated, difficult conditions. Workers facing considerable challenge, simply transporting materials to this remote rock formation, let alone constructing a structure capable of withstanding decades of severe coastal weather, exactly like tonight's storm. You think about those original builders sometimes, imagining their own particular challenges constructing this tower you now call home. Genuine respect for their engineering achievement, mixing with grim appreciation for exactly why this specific, difficult, isolated location required exactly this kind of dedicated, permanent warning system. Tonight, with a ship apparently struggling somewhere nearby, you feel this lighthouse's entire historical purpose condensed into immediate, pressing relevance. Your predecessor, keeper's accumulated experience, and this tower's careful original engineering, all converging toward this single, crucial night's essential warning function. You reflect, during this storm's tense waiting, on how different tonight's crisis would feel with modern radio communication, a technology that remains, at this point in your own particular era of lighthouse keeping, still relatively limited and unreliable compared to what future keepers will eventually enjoy. Without reliable radio contact, you have essentially no way of directly communicating with that struggling ship, no way of coordinating rescue efforts with mainland authorities, no way of even confirming with certainty exactly what's happening beyond your own limited, storm-obscured visual observation from this isolated tower. This limitation shapes your entire role during tonight's crisis. your actual practical function limited essentially to maintaining your light and bell's steady warning signal, trusting that this alone provides whatever assistance your isolated position allows you to offer during a crisis this severe. You think about future technology sometimes, wondering how different this job might eventually become. Once reliable radio communication becomes standard equipment, allowing keepers like yourself genuine two-way communication with ships and mainland authorities during exactly this kind of severe, uncertain emergency. For tonight, though, you work with what you have available: light, sound, careful observation, and simple, steady reliability, trusting that these traditional tools, refined across generations of lighthouse keeping experience, still provide genuine, meaningful value. You maintain your careful watch regardless, knowing that whatever limitations your current era's technology imposes, your fundamental job tonight remains unchanged from what lighthouse keepers have always provided: a reliable, trustworthy point of reference amid genuine maritime danger and uncertainty. Between your careful attention toward tonight's unfolding crisis, you maintain, as always, your station's official logbook, recording weather conditions, notable observations, and any significant events exactly as generations of previous keepers have documented their own respective watches. Tonight's entry, you realize, even while writing it, will likely stand out compared to your logbook's more typical, routine entries. This storm's severity and the observed distress signal representing exactly the kind of significant, notable event. This careful record-keeping tradition specifically exists to document. You record the flare's approximate time and direction, the storm's escalating severity, your own responsive actions activating the fog bell and maintaining careful watch, creating a written record that might eventually prove useful for maritime authorities investigating this ship's fate. This logbook tradition connects you, in its own quiet way, to every previous keeper who's maintained this same careful documentation across this lighthouse's entire operational history, your own entries eventually joining theirs within a continuous, accumulated record. You pause between log entries to check again on tonight's storm and whatever additional signs might indicate that struggling ship's current status, returning periodically to your logbook to add whatever additional relevant observation your continued careful watching manages to provide. Someday, you think briefly, some future keeper or historian might read tonight's entry, understanding through your careful documentation exactly what this night's crisis involved, ensuring tonight's events don't simply disappear into unrecorded, forgotten history. A severe wave strikes your lamp room's window directly, the sound sharp and startling despite your accumulated experience with this tower's usual storm behavior. Water striking glass, 70 feet above the water's normal level, with force considerable enough to make you instinctively step back. You check the window carefully afterward, relieved to find it intact despite the considerable force it just absorbed, though this impact serves as a stark, immediate reminder of exactly how severe tonight's storm has become. Waves reaching heights beyond what even your considerable experience here has previously required you to witness. This moment of genuine visceral fear passes relatively quickly. your training and experience reasserting themselves as you return attention to your ongoing responsibilities, though the adrenaline this specific impact generated lingers somewhat longer. In the moment's aftermath, you feel grateful for this tower's careful original construction, engineered specifically to withstand exactly this kind of severe weather challenge, though tonight's storm is clearly testing that engineering more severely than most nights during your own tenure here. You steady your own breathing deliberately, returning focus to the essential tasks tonight's crisis demands. Maintaining your light, monitoring your bell, watching carefully for whatever additional sign might indicate that struggling ship's current fate. The wave's impact fades into memory relatively quickly, though its lesson lingers. Tonight represents a serious test, both for whatever ship is struggling out there in the darkness and for your own tower's careful engineering. Beyond the storm's obvious external noise, you've learned across your years at this station to listen carefully to your tower's own particular structural sounds. Subtle creaks and groans that experienced keepers learn to distinguish between normal, expected structural flexibility and concerning signs of possible damage or weakness. Tonight, your tower produces more of these structural sounds than usual. Wood and metal components flexing and settling under the storm's relentless pressure. Sounds that would feel alarming to someone without your accumulated experience, but which you've learned to interpret as your tower's expected, designed response to exactly this kind of severe external stress. You listen carefully throughout tonight's storm, distinguishing between this expected structural flexibility and any sound that might indicate concern. Your trained ear, providing an additional layer of safety monitoring beyond your more obvious visual inspections of your tower's various components and systems. This skill, developed gradually across years of experience rather than through any formal specific training, represents exactly the kind of accumulated professional expertise that distinguishes experienced keepers from newer colleagues still developing their own confident understanding of their particular station's normal structural behavior under various weather conditions. You feel confident tonight in your ability to interpret these structural sounds, your tower's various creaks and groans falling within the range you've learned to recognize as expected. Designed flexibility rather than anything suggesting genuine structural concern, despite tonight's relentless testing. This auditory monitoring continues alongside your more visible duties, one additional layer of careful attention contributing toward your overall confidence that your tower continues successfully withstanding tonight's severe weather challenge without developing any concerning structural weakness or damage. Between your primary duties monitoring the light and watching for the struggling ship, you make your way carefully down toward the tower's lower levels, checking the foundation and lower structure for any sign that tonight's severe wave action might be causing genuine structural concern. This check requires navigating the same spiral staircase you climbed earlier, though moving downward through a tower actively shuddering under continued wave impact creates its own particular unsettling sensation. Each step accompanied by genuine awareness of exactly how much force this structure is currently absorbing. You inspect the lower chambers carefully, checking for any water intrusion, any concerning cracks or structural stress that might indicate tonight's storm exceeding this tower's careful original engineering tolerances, relieved to find everything holding steady, despite the considerable ongoing stress. This inspection, while reassuring regarding your tower's continued structural integrity, doesn't entirely eliminate your underlying awareness that tonight's storm represents serious severity. Your careful checking motivated precisely by legitimate concern. You climb back upward afterward, returning to your primary post, monitoring the light and watching for further sign of that struggling ship, carrying with you both relief regarding your tower's continued structural soundness and renewed awareness of exactly how severely tonight's storm continues, testing everything. The climb back up feels, if anything, more urgent than your earlier descent, aware that whatever time you've spent checking your tower's foundation represents time not spent watching for that struggling vessel, hurrying now to resume your careful, essential vigil. During this storm's tense, uncertain waiting, your mind drifts briefly toward memories of family back on the mainland, a wife and children who understand, as much as anyone not directly sharing this profession can, exactly what nights like tonight demand from you. You think about your last visit home, weeks ago now, ordinary domestic moments that felt, at the time, simply unremarkable features of family life, but which carry, tonight, particular warmth and significance given your current isolated, storm-battered circumstances. Your wife, you know, understands this job's genuine demands better than most, having married you fully aware of exactly what a lighthouse keeper's life involves: extended solitary postings, storms exactly like tonight's, and the kind of essential, unglamorous service this profession quietly provides. You wonder, briefly, whether news of tonight's storm has reached the mainland yet, whether your wife is perhaps lying awake herself right now, aware of this storm's severity, and wondering how you're managing here at this isolated, exposed station. This brief moment of personal reflection doesn't distract from your essential duties, simply providing a small, warming counterpoint to tonight's otherwise overwhelming external drama, a reminder of exactly why this solitary, demanding work feels worthwhile. You return your full attention to the storm and your ongoing watch, carrying this brief, warm memory forward as quiet motivation, knowing that your continued, careful, reliable service tonight represents a contribution toward keeping other families' loved ones safe. You think, during this quiet, reflective moment, about how your own children understand and imagine your particular unusual profession, their own perspective, necessarily shaped by limited, direct observation, given how rarely they visit your isolated station in person. Your youngest, still fairly small, apparently describes your work to schoolmates with considerable dramatic embellishment, according to your wife's occasionally amused letters, imagining your lighthouse keeping as involving more adventure and excitement than your actual, more typically routine daily experience involves. Your older children understand somewhat more accurately exactly what your work entails, having visited occasionally during calmer weather and better understanding the methodical maintenance and patient watching that constitutes most of your actual daily professional experience. You've tried, during your own visits home, to describe your work honestly, without either unnecessarily worrying them regarding genuine occasional dangers like last night's storm, or inadvertently encouraging unrealistic, overly romanticized understanding of what remains, most days, fairly routine, unglamorous technical maintenance work. Last night's crisis, you suspect, would validate your youngest's more dramatic, imagined version of your profession, though you'll likely describe it, when eventually sharing this story with your own family, with rather more measured, careful framing than your child's own imaginative embellishment would probably prefer. You smile. Considering this gap between your children's various imagined versions of your work and its actual daily reality, understanding this as simply one small, endearing example of how professions like your own inevitably become somewhat mysterious and romanticized to those who don't directly, personally experience their actual daily texture and genuine demands. Nearly an hour after the first signal, you spot a second flare, closer this time, close enough that you can make out slightly more detail in its brief, desperate arc of red light before the storm swallows it back into darkness. This second signal tells you something important. The ship remains afloat, still capable of deploying flares, still fighting whatever crisis initially prompted their first distress call nearly an hour ago now. You strain to judge the flare's exact distance and bearing, difficult given the storm's continued interference with clear visual observation, though this second signal seems to originate from roughly the same general direction as the first, suggesting the ship hasn't drifted dramatically from its earlier position. This proximity brings mixed feelings: relief that the ship remains close enough to potentially benefit from your lighthouse's continued warning signals, but also sharpened awareness of exactly how close this vessel currently sits to your own treacherous rocky shoals. You calculate rough estimates of how much longer this storm might reasonably be expected to continue, weather patterns you've learned to read across your years at this station, suggesting possible easing within the next several hours. You maintain your vigil with renewed intensity following this second flare, knowing that whatever crew is fighting for survival out there remains, for now, still fighting, still hoping, still depending on your lighthouse's steady presence. Between your visual watch for further flares, you strain constantly to hear any further sound from the ship's distress horn, that faint noise you'd noticed earlier now becoming an obsessive focus of your attention, despite the storm's overwhelming general noise. You press your ear occasionally against the lamp room's thick glass, an old habit some keepers develop, believing perhaps superstitiously that this somehow improves your ability to detect sounds carried across water. The wind itself produces its own complex range of sounds against your tower, occasionally, frustratingly, mimicking exactly the kind of horn blast you're specifically listening for. False alarms that spike your attention before you recognize them as simply wind. You catch, perhaps 20 minutes after that second flare, another sound that feels more distinct from the wind's usual patterns, a deeper, more sustained note that might represent the ship's horn. This straining, uncertain listening represents its own kind of exhausting vigilance, your senses working overtime, trying to extract meaningful signal from tonight's overwhelming storm noise. You persist regardless, knowing that even uncertain, partial information about that struggling ship feels better than simply not knowing anything at all. To help manage tonight's mounting tension, you find your mind recalling a story told to you years ago by the previous keeper during your own training period, an account of a significant wreck that occurred decades before your own tenure began. That earlier wreck claimed nearly 30 lives when a merchant vessel struck the same rocky shoals your current lighthouse now specifically warns against. A tragedy significant enough that it became one of several formative disasters, eventually convincing authorities to fund this lighthouse's original construction. The story included specific, vivid details passed down through generations of local memory. Survivors clinging to wreckage through a night nearly as severe as tonight's storm. Rescue attempts hampered by exactly the same treacherous conditions currently making tonight's situation so dangerous. You'd found this story, when originally told it, sobering, a clear reminder of exactly why your current profession matters so significantly. Tonight, this old story feels more immediate and relevant than it has during any previous storm you've weathered at this station. You push this anxious comparison aside deliberately, choosing instead to focus on the meaningful difference your lighthouse's continued presence and function might make tonight. Somewhere around 2 a.m, by your careful reckoning, tonight's storm reaches what feels like its most severe peak intensity, wind and waves, combining into an overwhelming sensory assault that tests every aspect of both your tower's engineering and your own personal composure. The tower itself shudders almost continuously now, each significant wave impact sending a distinct vibration through the entire structure that you can feel clearly through your own boots pressed against the lamp room's floor. Wind sounds have evolved beyond simple whistling into something closer to a continuous deep roar, occasionally punctuated by sharper, higher-pitched sounds you've learned to associate with severe individual gusts. You maintain your position throughout this peak intensity period, unwilling to abandon your watch despite the genuine physical and psychological demands this storm's severity currently imposes. You check the lamp and lens mechanism with particular frequent attention during this peak period, relieved each time your careful inspection confirms continued proper function despite the surrounding chaos. This peak period tests you personally as much as it tests your tower's engineering. Fear mixing with professional determination as you maintain your essential watch through what feels like the single most severe weather event you've personally experienced here. During the storm's worst moments, you recall, somewhat to your surprise, fragments of a prayer your grandmother taught you as a child, words you haven't consciously thought about in years, suddenly surfacing unbidden during this moment of personal fear and uncertainty. You're not, ordinarily, someone who thinks of yourself as religious. Your daily professional life oriented more toward practical, technical competence than any explicit spiritual practice. Yet these half-remembered words provide, tonight, a kind of comfort you hadn't expected to need or find meaningful. You murmur these fragmentary, remembered words quietly during a severe wave impact, not entirely certain whether you're praying in any formal sense or simply finding comfort in familiar, rhythmic language passed down from your own childhood, though the distinction feels, in this immediate moment, less important than the simple comfort these words provide. This unexpected spiritual moment passes relatively quickly, your more usual practical, professional focus reasserting itself as you return attention to your essential duties, though afterward you feel grateful for whatever comfort this brief moment provided during tonight's severe testing. You think, considering this experience honestly, that perhaps crisis reveals aspects of ourselves we don't always consciously acknowledge during our more ordinary, calmer daily experience. This profession's occasional danger, apparently connecting you to childhood memories and comfort you hadn't realized, remained so readily available within your own deeper personal experience. You continue your essential watch, carrying this brief, unexpected spiritual comfort forward alongside your more usual professional determination and technical competence, understanding both as genuine, valuable resources during circumstances as demanding as tonight's severe storm testing. During this storm's most severe peak, you experience a specific, uncomfortable moment of genuine doubt, wondering whether your tower's engineering might prove insufficient against conditions this severe. This doubt arrives specifically during an especially severe wave impact, the entire tower shuddering with force considerable enough that dust shakes loose from overhead structural joints, drifting down through your lamp room's air in a way that feels ominous. You force yourself to breathe deliberately through this moment of doubt, recalling everything you know about this tower's careful original engineering, the considerable safety margins built into its design specifically to handle conditions more severe than ordinary expected storms. This reasoning helps, though it doesn't entirely eliminate the visceral, immediate fear this moment generated. You maintain your position regardless, knowing that abandoning your post now would mean abandoning your essential function precisely when that struggling ship might need your light's continued guidance most critically. This moment passes, your composure gradually reasserting itself as the immediate wave's impact fades and your tower's continued steady function reaffirms itself. Following this severe testing moment, you conduct an especially careful inspection of your light and lens mechanism, wanting genuine confirmation that tonight's extreme conditions haven't compromised the actual function your entire lighthouse exists specifically to provide. You check the lens's rotation mechanism carefully, listening for any unusual sound that might indicate mechanical stress or damage, examining the various gears and clockwork components as thoroughly as tonight's ongoing storm conditions reasonably allow. The flame itself continues burning steadily, your earlier careful maintenance apparently sufficient to withstand even this storm's severe testing, the lens continuing its patient, reliable rotation. You feel relief confirming this continued proper function, knowing that any mechanical failure during tonight's crisis would represent catastrophic, professional, and moral failure. This careful inspection, while reassuring, doesn't entirely eliminate your underlying awareness that tonight's storm continues testing every aspect of your station's capability. You return to your broader watch duties with renewed confidence regarding your equipment's steady operation. During tonight's storm, you feel grateful for your methodical maintenance of spare parts and backup equipment. Precautionary preparation that suddenly feels more valuable given how severely tonight's conditions are testing every aspect of your station's essential equipment. You maintain, as standard careful practice, spare wicks, additional oil reserves beyond your typical calculated need, and basic replacement parts for your lens mechanism's more vulnerable components. Precautionary stock specifically maintained for exactly this kind of severe, demanding circumstance when equipment might potentially fail under unusual stress. This careful preparation reflects lessons learned across generations of lighthouse keeping experience. Previous equipment failures during past severe storms, eventually convincing maritime authorities to establish clear guidelines regarding appropriate spare parts and backup equipment. Every station should maintain, regardless of how rarely such backup supplies might prove necessary. You mentally review your available spare equipment during tonight's storm, confirming you possess genuine backup capability should your primary equipment somehow fail under tonight's severe testing. This mental inventory, providing some additional confidence alongside your equipment's continued, so far successful function. Fortunately, tonight's severe conditions haven't required deploying any of this careful backup preparation, your primary equipment continuing reliable function throughout the storm's entire duration. Though you remain grateful, this backup capability exists should circumstances have proven even more severely testing than they did. This methodical preparation represents, you understand clearly, an essential but often underappreciated aspect of your profession's genuine competence, unglamorous, administrative diligence that nonetheless provides crucial insurance against exactly the kind of severe, demanding circumstances tonight's storm specifically represented. Sometime after this storm's apparent peak intensity, you notice what feels like a subtle but genuine change in the wind's pattern, a slight shift in direction, and, perhaps, marginal easing in raw intensity. You remain cautious about this observation, knowing that storms occasionally offer false respite before renewed severity, unwilling to prematurely relax your careful vigilance. Still, you watch this potential shift with cautious, careful hope, knowing that any genuine easing in storm severity would improve both your struggling ship's chances and your own tower's continued structural safety margin. You continue monitoring both wind and wave patterns carefully over the following period, gradually gaining more confidence that this represents genuine, if still gradual, improvement. This cautious hope doesn't diminish your continued careful watch, knowing that even an improving storm remains dangerous during its transition period. You maintain focused attention throughout this uncertain transition period, watching carefully for any further sign regarding that struggling vessel's fate. You spot a third flare eventually, different somehow from the previous two, its trajectory and timing suggesting something has changed about the ship's situation, though you can't immediately determine whether this change represents improvement or further deterioration. This flare seems positioned slightly differently than the previous two, suggesting the ship may have moved, whether through their own crew's deliberate navigational effort or simply through the storm's continued powerful influence on their vessel's drift. You watch intently for any further signal or sign. This third flare's slightly different character, generating both cautious hope and continued underlying anxiety. The storm's gradually easing intensity, if your earlier observation proves accurate, would theoretically improve this ship's chances regardless of their exact current circumstances. You continue your careful watch, following this third signal, monitoring both the storm's continued gradual transition and any further sign from the struggling ship. This uncertainty itself proves difficult to sit with. Your natural inclination toward wanting clear, definitive resolution frustrated by your isolated position's inherent limitations. Gradually, over the following hour, tonight's storm's easing becomes more confidently apparent, wind intensity reducing meaningfully rather than simply offering another temporary, misleading lull. You feel your own physical tension beginning to ease somewhat alongside this storm's gradual improvement. Muscles you hadn't consciously realized were held in tight, sustained readiness, slowly beginning to relax. Your tower shuddering under wave impact reduces correspondingly, individual impacts becoming noticeably less severe and less frequent. You maintain careful watch regardless, knowing that even this welcome improvement doesn't yet represent complete safety, either for your own station or for that struggling ship. This gradual easing brings, alongside physical relief, renewed hope regarding that ship's ultimate fate. You continue your vigil through this transition period, cautiously beginning to allow yourself the hope that tonight's severe crisis might be approaching some eventual, hopefully positive resolution. As the storm continues its gradual easing, you become increasingly focused on the eventual arrival of dawn, knowing that daylight will finally provide genuine visual confirmation regarding both your own tower's condition and, hopefully, some clearer information regarding that struggling ship's ultimate fate. The remaining hours of darkness feel, somehow, both endless and rapidly passing simultaneously, your exhausted mind's perception of time distorted by tonight's sustained tension and vigilance. You maintain your careful watch throughout these final hours before dawn, storm conditions continuing their gradual improvement, while you continue monitoring for any further sign, positive or otherwise. Your body registers, increasingly, the genuine physical toll tonight's sustained crisis has demanded. Fatigue settling deep into muscles held tense for hours, eyes strained from extended careful watching. You allow yourself brief moments of rest where reasonably possible, though you never allow these brief rests to compromise your essential, continued vigilance. Dawn, when it finally arrives, will bring whatever answers tonight's darkness has so far withheld, and you watch the eastern horizon with particular focused attention. During a brief lull in tonight's storm, clouds parting momentarily before closing again, you catch an unexpected, brief glimpse of stars overhead, a small moment of celestial beauty amid tonight's otherwise overwhelming storm chaos that feels, in this tense moment, unexpectedly significant and calming. This brief celestial glimpse lasts only moments before clouds again obscure the sky, storm conditions reasserting their dominant presence, though this fleeting glimpse provides a small, genuine moment of perspective amid tonight's sustained crisis, a reminder that calm, ordinary patterns continue existing beyond tonight's immediate, overwhelming storm experience. You've noticed this phenomenon before. During previous storms, brief clearings, sometimes offering unexpected glimpses of stars or moon before clouds reassert their storm-related dominance. Meteorological quirks that provide small psychological comfort during otherwise sustained, difficult weather experiences. This glimpse tonight feels especially meaningful given the storm's genuine severity and the ongoing uncertainty regarding that struggling ship's fate, a small reminder that this current crisis, however overwhelming it feels in this immediate moment, exists within a much larger, calmer pattern that will eventually reassert itself once tonight's storm finally, fully passes. You feel grateful for this brief celestial glimpse. Small moments of unexpected beauty, providing meaningful psychological support during your sustained vigil through tonight's demanding, uncertain circumstances. Proof that calm and beauty continue existing even during your current, more immediately pressing storm experience. The clouds close again shortly after, storm conditions reasserting themselves fully. Though you carry this brief memory forward through the remaining hours of darkness, a small anchor of calm perspective amid tonight's continued, uncertain, demanding vigil. Dawn arrives gradually, grey light slowly revealing a seascape, still choppy and disturbed, but calmer than the genuine chaos that had characterized tonight's storm at its most severe peak intensity. You scan the horizon carefully as visibility improves, searching specifically for any sign of the ship whose distress signals had occupied your careful attention throughout this entire long, difficult night. You spot it eventually, a vessel battered by its ordeal but clearly still afloat, moving slowly but under apparent control toward what you recognize as the general direction of the nearest safe harbor. Relief floods through you with a force nearly as powerful as tonight's earlier fear. This visual confirmation finally resolving hours of uncertain, anxious waiting into genuine, tangible good news. You continue watching as the ship makes its slow, careful progress towards safety, knowing that your own lighthouse's continued steady function throughout tonight's severe storm likely contributed meaningfully toward this crew's ultimate, successful navigation. This moment of visual confirmation feels, after tonight's extended uncertainty, profound. Professional satisfaction mixing with simple human relief that strangers whose faces you'll likely never see have successfully survived a night that had seemed uncertain in its eventual outcome. As dawn continues establishing itself more fully, you appreciate the distinctive quality of sky and light that typically follows a severe storm's passage, colors and atmospheric clarity that feel more vivid and beautiful than your station's more ordinary, typical mornings usually provide. The sky shows streaks of orange and pink breaking through remaining gray cloud cover, storm-washed air, providing unusually clear visibility that lets you see further along the coastline than your usual daily conditions typically allow. Mainland features visible with unusual clarity in this post-storm morning light. This visual beauty feels, in its own way, like nature's own quiet acknowledgement of last night's severe testing. Calm, restored, not merely functionally but aesthetically, this morning's particular beauty, providing pleasant, emotional counterpoint to last night's genuine chaos and danger. You've noticed this pattern before across your years at this station. Severe storms frequently followed by mornings of unusual visual clarity and beauty, whether through simple meteorological coincidence or perhaps some genuine atmospheric cleansing effect that severe storms produce before weather patterns eventually return to more typical conditions. You allow yourself a genuine moment to simply appreciate this morning's particular beauty, knowing that this aesthetic pleasure represents a small but genuine reward for successfully navigating last night's demanding crisis, nature providing its own quiet, beautiful acknowledgement of difficult challenge successfully overcome. This appreciation for post-storm beauty has become, you realize, one of your profession's genuine unexpected pleasures, difficult challenges occasionally, followed by moments of unusual natural beauty that feel more meaningful and appreciated, precisely because of the genuine difficulty that preceded them. Considering this successful outcome now, with dawn's calmer light allowing more measured reflection, you appreciate more fully exactly what role your lighthouse's continued function likely played in this ship's ultimate safe passage. Your light provided, throughout tonight's crisis, a reliable, fixed reference point. Amid otherwise overwhelming storm chaos, information that likely helped the ship's crew maintain crucial navigational awareness. Your fog bell's audible signal provided additional confirmation and orientation, valuable during the storm's most severe periods when visual signals alone might have proven insufficient. You'll likely never know the specific details of exactly how the ship's crew used this information, or how close their situation came to genuine catastrophe during tonight's most severe hours. Yet you understand, with genuine professional satisfaction, that your work throughout tonight's crisis represents exactly the kind of essential contribution your entire profession exists specifically to provide. This satisfaction feels, this morning, more meaningful than any more conventional form of visible achievement or recognition might provide. Quiet confirmation that your solitary, demanding profession matters. As full morning light finally establishes itself, you begin the careful process of assessing tonight's storm's actual physical impact upon your own station, checking systematically through each level of your tower for any damage or concerning wear. You find, to your considerable relief, that your tower's careful original engineering has held remarkably well against tonight's severe testing, minor wear, and superficial damage evident in various places, but nothing approaching serious structural concern. The lamp room itself shows obvious signs of tonight's ordeal. Salt spray dried across every external surface, minor items shaken loose from their usual careful positions, though the essential equipment appears to have functioned perfectly throughout tonight's entire demanding crisis. You begin the practical work of restoring order to your station, cleaning salt residue, securing loose items, preparing careful notes regarding tonight's events for your official logbook entry. This practical restoration work feels satisfying, tangible evidence of returning normalcy following tonight's severe, uncertain ordeal. You pause periodically during this restoration work, looking out toward where you'd last observed that struggling ship making its careful way toward harbor, now vanished from view, but presumably continuing its safe journey, a small private satisfaction accompanying each of these brief pauses. As morning establishes itself following last night's severe storm, you notice seabirds gradually returning to your rocky station, their presence somehow marking, in its own natural way, this location's return toward calmer, more typical conditions following last night's severe weather exception. These birds, various species you've grown familiar with across your years at this station, typically shelter elsewhere during severe storms, their absence last night providing its own subtle, natural confirmation of exactly how severely tonight's weather had become compared to your station's more typical daily conditions. You watch them now, settling back into their usual perches and nesting areas around your rocky outcrop, their calm, unconcerned behavior providing pleasant, natural counterpoint to last night's genuine human drama and tension. Nature's own rhythm continuing regardless of whatever specific human crisis happened to unfold during the storm's most severe hours. Some keepers, you understand from shared professional stories, develop personal fondness for these seabird populations, considering them something like unofficial companions during their own extended solitary postings, a source of simple, natural observation and quiet company. Despite these birds' obvious lack of any genuine conscious social connection toward human observers, this morning you appreciate their return, small living confirmation that your station's environment is gradually returning toward its more typical, calmer baseline, following last night's severe exception. Nature's own patient rhythm reasserting itself alongside your own gradual return toward more typical daily routine. You continue watching them for a while longer than strictly necessary, finding simple, genuine pleasure in this small natural observation, a welcome, gentle contrast to last night's overwhelming storm drama and tension. Later that same morning, earlier than your regularly scheduled supply visit, you spot a boat approaching your station. Recognizing eventually the local harbor master's vessel rather than your usual supply contact, an unexpected visit that immediately suggests some connection to last night's dramatic events. The harbor master, once he's safely moored and climbed up to your station, confirms what you'd hoped. The ship you'd watched struggling through last night's storm made it safely into harbor early this morning, battered and requiring significant repair, but with her entire crew accounted for and safe. You listen with genuine professional interest as he shares additional details, the ship having suffered serious rudder damage during the storm's peak intensity, explaining exactly why they'd needed to deploy those distress flares you'd spotted. Their navigational controls severely compromised precisely when conditions demanded the most precise handling. The harbor master mentions specifically that the ship's captain credited your lighthouse's continued reliable signal with helping his damaged vessel maintain crucial orientation during the storm's worst hours. Unable to trust his own compromised instruments given the rudder damage, relying instead on your light's fixed, reliable position to help judge his ship's actual position and heading. This direct confirmation brings a kind of satisfaction beyond your own earlier, more uncertain hope regarding your lighthouse's actual practical contribution, genuine, professional validation that your work throughout last night's crisis made real, tangible difference for a crew facing genuine mortal danger. You thank the harbor master for making this special trip specifically to share this news, understanding the genuine kindness this represents, taking time from his own busy morning specifically to ensure you'd receive confirmation regarding an outcome you'd spent last night's entire storm anxiously, uncertainly hoping for. As the harbor master's boat departs, returning you to your station's usual solitary quiet, you reflect on this profession's particular defining characteristic: genuine, extended solitude that most people, you suspect, would find more challenging than they might initially assume. This solitude isn't simply physical isolation, though that certainly represents a significant, genuine feature of your daily circumstances, but something deeper, an absence of the ordinary social validation and immediate feedback most professions naturally provide. Your successes measured primarily through absence of disaster, rather than any more directly celebrated, visible achievement you've developed across your years at this station, a comfort with this solitude that you suspect distinguishes successful long-term keepers from those who eventually find this profession's isolation unbearable. A temperament suited toward finding satisfaction in quiet, essential service, rather than requiring more constant external recognition or social interaction. This doesn't mean solitude never proves difficult. Extended periods without meaningful human contact, occasionally weighing on your spirits in ways you've learned to manage through careful routine, occasional letters to and from family, and simple acceptance that this cost represents fair exchange for work you believe matters significantly. Last night's crisis, ironically, provided a kind of connection despite your continued physical isolation, shared purpose with that struggling ship's crew, even without any direct communication, a reminder that your solitary service connects you, in essential if invisible ways, to countless sailors whose safety depends on keepers like yourself maintaining faithful, reliable service. Regardless of how isolated that service might feel during its actual daily execution, you settle back into your station's familiar, quiet rhythm following the harbor master's departure, genuine solitude returning but carrying, today, particular satisfaction following last night's successfully concluded crisis. Reflecting further on your profession's broader historical context, you consider how your current oil lamp technology represents genuine improvement over earlier, more primitive lighthouse illumination methods that previous generations of keepers relied upon before your current equipment's development. Early lighthouse warning systems relied on simple open fires, burning coal or wood atop towers. Technology less reliable and less powerful than your current oil lamp and Fresnel lens combination. Early fire-based systems, vulnerable to wind, extinguishing flames entirely during exactly the kind of severe storms when reliable warning signals matter most critically. Candles represented an intermediate improvement, more controllable than open fires, though still less powerful and reliable than your current technology. Early lighthouse keepers, managing more labor-intensive maintenance requirements, while providing warning signals of more limited range and reliability compared to your current equipment's genuine capability. You appreciate, understanding this technological evolution, how significantly your own current oil lamp and lens technology represents accumulated generations of practical innovation and improvement, each advancement building upon previous limitations, to create increasingly reliable, powerful warning systems capable of protecting sailors across greater distances and more challenging weather conditions. This technological appreciation feels relevant following last night's severe storm, knowing that earlier keepers working with more primitive equipment would have faced greater challenge, maintaining reliable warning signals through conditions as severe as what you personally just successfully navigated using your current, more sophisticated technology. You feel gratitude for this accumulated technological improvement, knowing that your own successful service last night depended partly on standing atop generations of previous innovation and improvement. Technology developed specifically to make exactly this kind of essential maritime safety service increasingly reliable and effective across each successive generation of dedicated lighthouse keepers. Among your memories of this posting's various challenges, you recall specifically a recent Christmas spent largely alone at this station, family visits limited by weather and practical logistics, a kind of solitude that felt, at the time, more poignant than your usual, more routine daily isolation. You'd prepared as best you could for this solitary holiday, small personal touches marking the occasion despite your isolated circumstances, a modest but genuine effort toward maintaining some sense of celebration. Despite lacking the family gathering you'd have naturally preferred for this occasion. Other keepers, you understand from shared professional stories and correspondence, have developed their own particular traditions for managing exactly this kind of professionally necessary but personally difficult holiday isolation. Small acts of self-care and deliberate marking of significant occasions, despite circumstances that prevent more conventional celebration. You'd received, that Christmas, a small package from your family, delivered slightly early by your supply boat, specifically timed to reach you before the actual holiday. Small gifts and a lengthy letter that provided genuine warmth and connection despite your physical distance from family celebration happening simultaneously back on the mainland. This memory surfaces now, considering last night's dramatic crisis, as a reminder of this profession's broader emotional complexity. Moments of genuine difficulty and isolation existing alongside moments of professional satisfaction and purpose. Like last night's successfully concluded storm crisis, the full, complicated emotional texture of a career that demands considerable personal sacrifice in exchange for meaningful, essential service. You carry this memory, and others like it, as part of your broader understanding of exactly what this profession costs and provides. A complicated, but ultimately, you believe, worthwhile exchange between personal sacrifice and genuine, meaningful contribution toward maritime safety and sailors' continued welfare. You've learned, across your years in this profession, to pay careful attention to your own psychological well-being, given this job's genuine, extended isolation, understanding from both personal experience and shared professional knowledge exactly how significantly extended solitude can affect mental health if not carefully managed. Previous keepers, according to occasionally shared professional stories, have sometimes struggled with this isolation's psychological demands. Some, eventually finding this career unsustainable, despite their best efforts. Others developing serious psychological difficulty that eventually required them to leave this demanding profession for their own genuine well-being. You've developed your own careful personal strategies for managing this isolation successfully, maintaining regular correspondence with family, establishing careful daily routine that provides structure and purpose, engaging in personal hobbies and reading that provide mental stimulation beyond your station's essential but repetitive daily maintenance requirements. Last night's crisis, while stressful, provided its own kind of psychological value, a clear, meaningful challenge that engaged your full professional attention and skill, a reminder of exactly why this isolated service matters significantly, even during the more routine, less dramatically eventful periods that characterize most of your actual daily experience at this station. You remain alert to your own psychological state following this demanding crisis, knowing that even successful resolution of significant challenge like last night's storm can produce its own kind of emotional aftermath. Adrenaline and sustained tension, requiring proper processing and recovery time, even when, as last night, everything ultimately resolved successfully and positively. This careful attention toward your own psychological well-being represents, you understand clearly, an essential professional skill in its own right, exactly as important toward your continued successful service as your more obviously technical duties, maintaining your light and lens mechanism's continued proper function. Among your careful strategies for managing this profession's isolation successfully, your modest but carefully curated personal library plays a significant role, providing mental engagement and imaginative escape during your station's extended quiet periods between more dramatically eventful nights like yesterday's storm. You've collected, across your years at various postings, a considerable personal collection covering diverse subjects, maritime history and technical manuals relevant to your profession, novels and poetry, providing imaginative engagement beyond your immediate physical circumstances, and philosophical or religious texts that provide deeper reflection during your extended periods of solitary contemplation. Reading provides genuine psychological value beyond simple entertainment, you've found. Structured mental engagement that helps maintain cognitive sharpness and emotional stability during extended isolation that might otherwise, without such deliberate mental stimulation, prove more psychologically challenging to successfully manage. You've developed particular reading rituals around your daily and nightly duties, specific books reserved for calm evening watches, others saved specifically for daytime reading during your station's more routine maintenance periods. This careful structuring providing additional meaningful rhythm to your extended, solitary, daily experience. Last night's crisis, understandably, left little opportunity for your usual reading routine, though tonight you appreciate your careful collection's availability now that circumstances have returned to calmer, more typical conditions, allowing this valued personal practice's welcome resumption. You consider sometimes how more psychologically difficult this profession's isolation might prove without this careful, deliberate cultivation of meaningful mental engagement through reading. Understanding your personal library as an essential tool for successful long-term service in this demanding, isolated profession, exactly as important, in its own way, as your more obviously technical equipment and training. You think, resting now following last night's demanding crisis, about the network of other lighthouses positioned along this same general stretch of challenging coastline, each station's keeper providing their own essential contribution toward this broader maritime safety system you're personally part of. These various stations, though physically isolated from each other, collectively create a continuous chain of reliable warning signals that ships traveling along this entire coastline can depend upon, each individual lighthouse's specific warning covering its own particular stretch of potentially hazardous water. You've met several of these fellow keepers occasionally. Brief professional gatherings during supply runs or official inspections, providing rare opportunities for shared professional connection and mutual understanding regarding this demanding profession's particular challenges and rewards. Last night's storm, you understand, likely affected these neighboring stations similarly. Fellow keepers along this same coastline, probably facing their own versions of severe weather challenge, though you have no immediate way of knowing exactly how their own particular nights unfolded beyond your own station's specific, personally experienced crisis. This broader network provides, you find, a kind of professional comfort and connection despite your own station's physical isolation. Understanding yourself as part of a larger, coordinated system of dedicated professionals, all contributing their own essential piece toward this coastline's overall maritime safety. Individual isolated service combining into significant collective protection for sailors traveling these waters. You feel, considering this broader professional network, less alone than your station's physical isolation might otherwise suggest, connected through shared purpose and mutual professional understanding to colleagues you rarely see directly, but whose parallel dedicated service you deeply respect and rely upon as part of this coastline's broader, essential maritime safety infrastructure. You recall, considering your broader professional network, a memorable visit from a fellow keeper several years ago, an older, more experienced colleague who'd stopped briefly during an official inspection tour, providing rare opportunity for genuine, extended professional conversation and shared understanding. This experienced colleague shared numerous stories from his own longer career, including several accounts of severe storms he'd personally weathered at various different stations across his extended service. Valuable, practical wisdom regarding exactly how to maintain both technical competence and personal psychological composure during demanding, severe weather crises. You'd absorbed his advice carefully at the time, understanding intuitively that this kind of direct, experienced professional guidance represented valuable preparation for challenges you'd likely eventually face yourself during your own continued career at this demanding, isolated profession. Last night's storm, you realize now, drew directly upon several specific pieces of advice this experienced colleague had shared during that memorable visit. His guidance regarding maintaining careful equipment inspection during severe stress, and his encouragement toward trusting your tower's engineering even during moments of personal fear, proving valuable during your own recent, demanding crisis. You feel considerable gratitude toward this experienced colleague's generous mentorship, understanding how significantly his shared wisdom contributed toward your own successful navigation of last night's test circumstances. Professional knowledge passed between generations of dedicated keepers, providing exactly the kind of practical preparation official training alone couldn't quite fully provide. You hope, someday, to provide similar valuable mentorship toward younger keepers just beginning their own careers. Understanding this kind of generous knowledge sharing between generations as an essential, if informal, component of this profession's continued collective competence and success across successive generations of dedicated maritime safety service. Beyond your personal logbook entries, last night's significant crisis requires you to prepare a more formal official report for maritime authorities, documenting the events, your own responsive actions, and the eventual successful outcome for their official records and potential future reference. You approach this report writing carefully, understanding its potential importance beyond simple bureaucratic requirement. This documentation potentially proving useful for future safety improvements, insurance investigations regarding the ship's damage, or simply maintaining accurate historical record regarding this station's operational history and demonstrated value. You describe the storm's timeline carefully, the flares you observed, and their approximate timing and bearing. Your own responsive actions maintaining the light and activating the fog bell. And finally, the eventual successful outcome confirmed by the harbor master's visit this same morning. This methodical documentation feels satisfying in its own particular way, transforming last night's chaotic, uncertain experience into clear, organized record that accurately captures what occurred and what your own professional response specifically involved. You take particular care describing the ship's apparent rudder damage, and your understanding of how your light's continued signal likely helped their compromised navigation, information that might prove useful for maritime safety officials studying this incident for broader lessons about storm response and navigational safety protocols. Completing this official report provides its own particular sense of closure regarding last night's demanding crisis, transforming personal experience into permanent official record, ensuring that both the danger faced and the successful resolution achieved become part of this station's and this profession's broader, documented, historical contribution toward maritime safety. You consider completing your official report regarding last night's crisis, that you'll likely never receive any direct communication from the ship's crew themselves, this profession's particular nature, meaning your essential contribution toward their safety, typically remains anonymous, unacknowledged by the specific individuals who benefited from your work. This absence of direct gratitude or acknowledgement doesn't diminish your satisfaction regarding last night's successful outcome. You've come to understand across your years in this profession, meaningful service, not requiring explicit recognition to matter or provide authentic personal satisfaction. You think, sometimes, about whether that ship's captain or crew members ever specifically consider the keeper whose light guided them safely through last night's crisis, understanding realistically that your own specific identity likely matters less to them than simply the reliable presence of light and warning signal your station provided during their emergency. This anonymity feels, considering it honestly, entirely appropriate given this profession's fundamental nature, your value deriving from reliable institutional function rather than personal relationship or individual recognition, exactly as previous generations of keepers have understood and accepted throughout this profession's entire historical tradition. You find genuine peace with this anonymous service model, knowing that seeking explicit personal recognition would fundamentally misunderstand this profession's actual purpose and appropriate reward structure, your satisfaction deriving from simply knowing your careful service made real, meaningful difference, regardless of whether specific individuals ever explicitly acknowledge your particular contribution. This quiet, anonymous service tradition connects you realize, to countless previous keepers who've provided similarly essential, similarly unacknowledged service across this profession's entire historical tradition. Your own last night's contribution, simply the latest example within this long, proud tradition of essential maritime safety service that rarely seeks or receives explicit individual recognition. As the day following last night's dramatic crisis continues, you gradually return to your station's ordinary, familiar daily routine, the extraordinary tension and drama of last night's storm, slowly receding back into your more typical, calmer daily rhythm of careful maintenance and quiet, patient watching. You perform your usual daytime duties with particular attentiveness today, cleaning your lens's glass prisms with careful thoroughness, checking your mechanical systems methodically, ensuring everything remains prepared for whatever tonight, hopefully calmer, evening might eventually bring. This return to ordinary routine feels, in its own way, welcome, following last night's extraordinary demands. Your body and mind both appreciating the comparative calm and predictability this more typical daily rhythm provides. After such an intensely demanding, uncertain night, throughout the day's routine, you continue processing last night's experience, occasional moments of delayed emotional reaction surfacing unexpectedly as your nervous system continues gradually releasing the sustained tension it maintained throughout last night's extended crisis. This gradual return to routine doesn't erase last night's significance, you understand, but rather represents this profession's particular rhythm. Extended periods of quiet, essential routine, punctuated occasionally by moments of genuine dramatic significance, exactly like last night's storm and successful rescue contribution. You feel, completing this day's routine duties, a kind of satisfaction specific to this profession's unique rhythm, appreciating both the quiet routine that constitutes most of your service and the occasional dramatic significance that reminds you vividly and unmistakably exactly why this quiet, routine service matters so significantly when circumstances like last night's storm eventually, inevitably, arrive. Several days following last night's dramatic crisis, your regularly scheduled supply boat finally arrives, bringing fresh provisions alongside mail from family and whatever official correspondence has accumulated since your previous scheduled delivery. This routine visit, providing welcome opportunity for broader connection beyond the harbor master's earlier brief, specific visit regarding the rescued ship's confirmed safety. Your regular supply boat captain, upon arrival, mentions that news of last night's storm and the ship's dramatic rescue has already begun circulating through mainland maritime communities. Your own station's specific contribution toward this successful outcome, apparently generating some genuine local recognition and appreciation among people who understand professionally exactly how significant your work proved during this emergency. You receive, among your regular mail delivery, an unexpected letter from your professional supervisor. Formal acknowledgement of your successful handling of last night's crisis, official recognition that feels meaningful, despite your own earlier acceptance that this profession rarely provides much explicit, direct recognition for its essential, often anonymous service. This combination of official acknowledgement and informal community recognition provides genuine, welcome validation beyond your own internal professional satisfaction, though you see it as a pleasant addition rather than essential requirement for your continued genuine job satisfaction and professional commitment. You spend considerable time with your regular supply boat captain during this visit, sharing your own detailed account of last night's experience while hearing his own perspective on how news of this event has been received and discussed within broader local maritime community. This extended conversation, providing welcome social connection, following your recent intense, largely solitary crisis experience. The supply boat eventually departs, leaving you once again in your station's familiar, solitary circumstances, though today's visit provided welcome reminder of your broader connection to community and profession beyond your immediate physical isolation. Genuine human connection and professional recognition that feels meaningful following last night's demanding, ultimately successfully resolved crisis. Considering your next scheduled visit home, still some weeks away, you begin composing in your mind how you'll eventually describe last night's dramatic crisis to your wife. Understanding the challenge of accurately conveying danger and tension without unnecessarily alarming her regarding risks you face during your continued isolated service. You'll likely emphasize the successful outcome prominently, the ship's safe arrival and crew's confirmed well-being, knowing that leading with this positive resolution will help frame the more tense, difficult details you'll also need to honestly share regarding just how severe tonight's storm became. You consider, too, how to appropriately balance honest disclosure regarding danger with avoiding unnecessary, additional worry for someone who already carries considerable anxiety regarding your chosen profession's inherent occupational risks. A balance you've learned to navigate carefully across your years of marriage to someone who supports your career, while naturally worrying about your safety during circumstances exactly like last night's crisis. Your wife, you know from experience, generally appreciates honest disclosure over protective omission, having expressed clearly in the past her preference for understanding your actual experiences rather than receiving carefully sanitized, incomplete accounts that might inadvertently suggest you don't trust her with difficult truths about your demanding profession's genuine occasional dangers. You'll share, eventually, both the fear you experienced during the storm's most severe testing and the professional satisfaction you felt confirming the ship's successful, safe outcome, trusting that this honest, complete account will help her understand both this profession's genuine occasional dangers and its equally genuine, meaningful rewards. This anticipated conversation, still weeks away, already provides its own particular comfort tonight, knowing that sharing this experience with someone who cares about your well-being will help you more fully process and integrate last night's demanding experience into your own ongoing understanding of this profession's complicated, meaningful reality. As evening approaches once again, you begin your usual preparations for another night's watch, though tonight's circumstances feel calmer than yesterday's dramatic storm. Weather forecasts suggesting a return to more ordinary, manageable conditions following last night's severe exception. You light your lamp at dusk with your usual careful attention, though tonight's preparation feels, understandably, slightly different following yesterday's demanding crisis. An appreciation for this routine's essential importance that perhaps felt somewhat more abstract before last night's direct, vivid demonstration of exactly why this careful, nightly ritual matters so significantly. The sea tonight appears calmer, gentle waves rather than yesterday's terrifying, towering walls of water, wind reduced to ordinary, manageable levels that pose none of yesterday's genuine structural testing challenge to your tower's careful engineering. You settle into tonight's watch with a blend of your usual professional attentiveness and renewed personal appreciation for calm nights like this one, understanding now, with fresh, vivid clarity, exactly how valuable these more typical, uneventful nights are compared to the severe testing yesterday's storm specifically represented. This appreciation doesn't diminish your continued professional vigilance, knowing that tonight's calm conditions still require the same careful, consistent attention any night demands, your light's steady operation mattering, regardless of whether tonight brings dramatic crisis or simply ordinary, peaceful maritime passage for whatever ships happen to be traveling these waters. You watch the light begin its familiar, steady rotation as darkness falls, gentle waves lapping calmly against your tower's base far below, a peaceful contrast to yesterday's genuine chaos that feels especially welcome after the demands of yesterday's crisis. Reflecting now, during tonight's calmer watch, on everything this demanding profession has taught you across your years of service, you appreciate particular lessons that yesterday's dramatic crisis brought into especially vivid, immediate focus. You've learned patience, knowing that meaningful service sometimes requires extended periods of quiet, unglamorous routine punctuated by occasional moments of significance. Success measured more by consistent reliability than by any more dramatic, immediately visible achievement. You've learned self-reliance, developing confidence in your own judgment and capability during moments, exactly like yesterday's storm, when no immediate outside guidance or support remains available. Your own careful training and accumulated experience needing to prove sufficient for whatever challenge circumstances present. You've learned, too, a kind of humility regarding your actual, specific contribution toward outcomes you'll often never fully witness or understand, trusting that your work matters even without complete confirmation or detailed understanding of exactly how significantly your specific actions helped resolve any particular crisis. Yesterday's storm crystallized these accumulated lessons into vivid, immediate clarity, a test of everything your training and experience had prepared you for. Successfully navigated through combination of careful technical competence, personal courage, and simple, stubborn commitment toward fulfilling your essential professional duty, regardless of personal fear or uncertainty. You carry these lessons forward now, tonight's calmer watch providing welcome opportunity for this kind of reflective processing, understanding your profession's value and personal cost with more vivid, direct clarity than you possessed before yesterday's demanding, ultimately successfully concluded crisis provided this valuable, if difficult, learning opportunity. As tonight's calm watch continues, storm clouds and towering waves now simply memory rather than immediate, pressing concern. You finally begin to release the accumulated tension yesterday's crisis demanded you maintain for so many difficult, uncertain hours. You think one final time tonight about that struggling ship now safely harbored and undergoing whatever repairs its storm damage requires. its crew presumably enjoying their own well-earned rest following an ordeal that came, by any honest assessment, close to potentially catastrophic outcome. You think about your own tower, tested severely but holding firm. Careful engineering and generations of accumulated maritime safety knowledge, combining successfully to provide exactly the reliable protection this dangerous stretch of coastline has required since this lighthouse's original, careful construction. You think about your own personal service, tested by circumstances more demanding than most nights during your entire tenure here have previously required, successfully navigated through combination of careful professional training, personal courage, and simple committed persistence through legitimate fear and uncertainty. None of this feels, even now, like dramatic personal achievement. Simply the essential, quiet fulfillment of duty this demanding profession specifically requires, though you allow yourself tonight genuine, quiet satisfaction regarding everything yesterday's crisis demonstrated about your own capability and this profession's genuine, essential value. You settle now into tonight's calmer, quieter watch. Gratitude and quiet professional pride mixing gently with simple physical and emotional exhaustion. Finally beginning to ease following yesterday's demanding, ultimately successfully resolved crisis. As your watch continues through tonight's calm, peaceful hours, you find your own eyes growing pleasantly heavy. The accumulated exhaustion from yesterday's demanding crisis and today's careful processing finally asserting itself now that circumstances allow genuine, safe rest. The light above you continues its patient, steady rotation, exactly as it has throughout your entire tenure here, exactly as it will continue long after tonight's watch eventually concludes. This essential, reliable function, continuing regardless of whether you're actively, consciously monitoring it every single moment, or beginning, finally, to rest. You think, one final time, about everything this profession has taught you, about yesterday's crisis successfully navigated, about the ship and crew now safely harbored, about your own tower's proven, tested resilience, about this profession's quiet, essential value that yesterday's dramatic events demonstrated with such vivid, unmistakable clarity. Tonight, the sea remains calm. Tonight, your light burns steady without any particular additional demand beyond its usual, essential function. Tonight, you're finally allowed the rest your body and mind have been patiently waiting for. Since yesterday's storm first began, testing your considerable professional capability and personal courage. Close your eyes. Let the light continue its patient turning without your constant conscious attention, trusting its careful mechanism to continue faithfully through whatever remains of tonight's calm, peaceful hours. Let the gentle waves continue their soft, undemanding rhythm against your tower's base, so different from yesterday's terrifying chaos, a soothing sound rather than a source of concern. And sleep, the way only someone who successfully weathered storm and crisis can gratefully allow themselves to rest, deeply and completely. Tonight, your essential duty faithfully, successfully fulfilled.